She walked the halls in silence, just a custodian in a faded uniform. Invisible to everyone except when they needed someone to ignore, or mock. No one cared who she was. No one asked why her hands moved with such quiet grace. Until the day disaster struck. And they shoved her toward a grand piano, not out of trust, but as a cruel joke. What happened next? It silenced every voice in the room. Because what they didn't know was this woman, dismissed, overlooked, humiliated, once held a dream that could have lit up concert halls. And in that moment, with 200 people watching, she didn't just play, she reminded them who she really was. This is the story of Clara Mitchell, a woman who had nothing left to prove, until the world demanded she prove it. Stick around. You won't believe what happens when silence becomes her greatest weapon. Clara Mitchell moved quietly between the grand marble columns of the Aldridge Music Conservatory. Her faded uniform blending into the background like a shadow that no one cared to notice. At 29, she wore the beige outfit of the custodial staff with understated pride, no makeup, no jewelry. Just a neat ponytail and the quiet dignity of someone who worked hard without expecting applause. Her sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floors, a sound quickly drowned out by the soaring melodies of Chopin from nearby practice rooms. To most at the conservatory, Clara was invisible, just the woman who emptied bins, wiped windows, and made fingerprints disappear from crystal fixtures. She had worked here for nearly 4 years, and in all that time, barely a handful of faculty had ever looked her in the eyes. She had become a fixture, like the antique portraits lining the halls, present, but unacknowledged. That morning, as she straightened a crooked portrait of a forgotten composer, her supervisor called out without looking up, "Clara, can you handle the reception hall today? Big donors coming in." "Yes, Mr. Donnelly," she replied, her voice soft but steady. The reception hall gleamed with high ceilings, velvet curtains, and a Steinway grand piano that had hosted the fingers of prodigies and professionals alike. As Clara adjusted the row of chairs, precisely 1 inch apart as required, she caught her reflection in the polished brass of a nearby lamp. For just a moment, her expression faltered. In that fleeting glimmer, she didn't see the janitor. She saw the young girl she once was, 15 years old, sitting at a similar piano, filled with dreams and talent. But life had redirected her path. When her father died and her mother fell ill, Clara left behind her scholarship to care for her younger siblings. She took the first job she could find. And the piano? It waited in silence. Just then, the sharp clicks of heels broke her reverie. Victoria Langford, the conservatory's director, swept in like a thunderstorm wrapped in designer fabric. "These chairs," she snapped, "must be exact. This is not a garage sale. The Alden Foundation expects perfection." Clara nodded and quietly adjusted the spacing. Samantha Doyle, the school's elite piano instructor, strolled in moments later. "Do remind the help to stay out of sight when the guests arrive," she said with a smirk, casting a deliberate glance in Clara's direction. "We wouldn't want any distractions." Clara didn't respond. Her hands moved steadily, her jaw firm, but inside, something stirred, a flicker. Faint but steady. She was used to being overlooked. But today would be different. Part 2. The note behind the silence. Clara Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she folded the duster and tucked it under the reception counter. Her heart still echoed with the sound of Victoria Parker's voice, sharp, authoritative, deciding her fate like a judge's gavel. The decision had been made. She would perform at the gala or potentially lose her job. The stakes were not just a performance, they were her dignity. She returned to her modest supply closet, sat on an overturned bucket, and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. Inside, yellowing pages contained scribbled notations, fingerings, and reminders written years ago in her grandmother's graceful handwriting. Clara ran her fingers over the margins where small hearts and stars were drawn beside difficult passages, a kind of whispered encouragement from a woman long gone but never forgotten. That night, Clara stayed long after the final staff left. The conservatory echoed with emptiness. But to her, it was alive. She approached the grand piano in the rehearsal room and sat gently, as though reuniting with an old friend. Her fingers hovered above the keys. And then, like the first breath after silence, she began to play. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 flowed from her like breath, like memory. It wasn't rehearsed, it was lived. She played not for applause but for all the Sunday mornings spent at her grandmother's side. For the dreams she'd packed away in boxes labeled, someday, and, maybe. For the nights she rocked her younger siblings to sleep while other students her age were winning competitions. Her performance wasn't perfect in the way conservatory judges defined it, but it was perfect in the way truth is, raw, real, undeniable. The next evening arrived like a slow-building storm. Chandeliers sparkled above silk gowns and tuxedos. Wine glasses clinked against marble. Whispers of wealth moved through the air like perfume. In the middle of it all, Clara stood just off stage, still in her beige uniform. Name tag pinned to her chest like a scarlet label, custodian. The MC's voice rang out. In a moment of unexpected inspiration, one of our very own will offer tonight's performance. There was polite laughter. A woman in pearls murmured, "How quaint." Clara stepped into the spotlight. A silence fell, not out of respect, but expectation of a novelty. A curious sideshow before the real speeches began. She sat. She adjusted the bench. She lowered her gaze to the keys and exhaled. Then she played. At first, the notes floated hesitantly, like a memory stretching awake. But then came the tempo, the fire, the emotion. Her fingers moved faster, then softer, then powerfully across the keys with the precision of someone who had played the piece in her dreams for 15 years. Eyes widened, laughter stopped, conversations paused mid-sentence. One by one, heads turned. Even Samantha Reed, who had prepared to scoff from the wings, slowly stepped forward, mouth parted in disbelief. The music filled the hall like truth fills a silence, unapologetic, haunting, unforgettable. When the final, thunderous chord rang out, there was no immediate applause, just stunned stillness. A woman dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. A man leaned forward, whispering to his wife, "Where did she come from?" Then came the applause, tentative at first, then rising, swelling, roaring. It rolled through the marble like a wave that had finally arrived. Clara didn't stand right away. She bowed her head for a breath, then rose slowly, gracefully, and offered a quiet bow. She had spoken without words, and everyone had heard her. If you're still here, listening to Clara's story with me, if you felt something stir inside your heart as she sat at that piano, comment 1 below to let me know you're still with me. Because what happens next is something no one in that music hall will ever forget. Part 3: The truth in her hands. The applause had ended, but the moment lingered like the final chord of a song that refused to fade. Clara Mitchell stepped off the stage with her head held higher than it had in years. Her uniform still hung loose at the shoulders. Her sneakers still squeaked on the marble. But the way people looked at her had changed. No longer invisible, no longer the woman who emptied their trash cans. She was now the woman who played. In the wings, Samantha Reed stood motionless. Her arms, once crossed in smug anticipation, now hung at her sides. She hadn't moved since Clara's first arpeggio shattered the room's assumptions. Jason Miller, the teaching assistant who had believed in Clara, was the first to reach her. "That was magnificent," he whispered, handing her a bottle of water. "You didn't just play, you told a story." Clara smiled, breathless but grounded. It was never just about the music. Back in the reception hall, whispers turned into full conversations. Names were exchanged, questions were asked. The same patrons who had looked past Clara for years were now circling around the story they had nearly missed. In a far corner, Victoria Parker, usually poised with confidence, stood quietly beside Richard Taylor, the chairman of the board. Her expression was unreadable. "We underestimated her," Richard said, his eyes still fixed on the stage. "We didn't see her," Victoria replied, almost to herself. "No," Richard corrected gently, "we refused to look." Just then, a familiar voice broke through the hum of conversation. "Excuse me," said a man in his early 60s, dressed in a tailored brown suit. His white beard framed a warm, curious smile. "I'm David Thompson. I was conductor of the San Francisco Youth Symphony for over 2 decades. Clara turned, unsure how to respond. "I came tonight for a donation pitch," he continued, "but I witnessed something much rarer: authenticity. Talent is common. Technique is taught, But what you gave us. That was soul. Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. David reached into his coat and pulled out a card. We're launching a new initiative. Music Within Reach. It's for students from underfunded schools. We need someone who understands what it's like to dream without means. Someone who knows what it's like to be unseen, until they're heard. He placed the card in her hand. We need you. Across the room, Samantha Reed caught sight of the exchange. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she turned away. Her students, once clustered around her, were now gathered near Clara. Asking about technique, about feeling, about how she made the piece sound like it was telling a secret. Clara spoke to them gently, explaining not theory or tempo, but intention. The piano doesn't need perfection, she said, it needs honesty. Later that night, when the hall was empty again, Clara returned to the stage alone. Not to perform, but to breathe it in. The space felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Her quiet footsteps echoed not with shame, but with memory. She sat at the bench one more time, resting her hands on the keys. She didn't play, she just closed her eyes. Thank you, Grandma, she whispered. A soft voice called from the back. Clara? It was Jason. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. Someone dropped this off for you at the front desk. Inside was a framed photograph, an old black and white shot of her grandmother at a concert. Seated at a piano, a familiar glow in her smile. Tucked behind the frame was a note. For every note you played, I heard you. I always believed you would return to the music. MJ. Clara's eyes welled with tears. She pressed the photo to her chest and nodded silently. That night, she didn't leave by the back corridor like usual. She walked straight through the grand lobby, chin up, heart steady. She was no longer just the custodian. No longer just the girl who had once been good. She was Clara Mitchell, a musician, a teacher, a daughter of legacy. And for the first time in years, she knew exactly where she belonged. Part 4. A seat at the piano. A place in the world. 3 days had passed since Clara Mitchell walked off the stage to a standing ovation. But the echoes of that night followed her like a quiet symphony through every hallway of the Aldridge Conservatory. Her janitor's badge had been replaced with a simple name tag. Instructor, Music Within Reach Program. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't gold-plated, but to Clara, it felt heavier than any title she'd ever dreamed of. It meant someone believed in her. It meant her place here wasn't borrowed, it was earned. Her routine had changed. She no longer arrived through the back entrance. No longer carried a ring of keys and a mop cart. Instead, she carried sheet music, a worn leather notebook filled with her grandmother's handwritten notes, and a sense of purpose that stretched far beyond any single performance. The Music Within Reach program welcomed its first class that Monday. 8 students, ranging from shy 12-year-olds to young adults in their 20s, each one carrying their own burdens, their own doubts. One had never touched a real piano before. Another had nearly been expelled from public school for skipping class, only to reveal he'd been sneaking into a church basement to practice on a broken keyboard. They were quiet at first, eyes wary, posture stiff, until Clara spoke. I used to mop the floors in this building, she said gently, standing by the grand piano. Now I teach in it. So if you think you don't belong, think again. That got their attention. Over the next hour, the room began to shift. Not through discipline, but through trust. Clara didn't ask them to play scales or recite composers' names. She asked them to tell her what music felt like to them. Home, said a girl in the back. Barely audible, like breathing, whispered a boy with calloused fingers. Clara nodded. That's where we begin. Outside the classroom, not everyone was ready for the change. Samantha Reed watched from a distance as Clara's students filled the once unused practice rooms with raw, imperfect sound. She passed Clara in the hallway later that week and gave a tight nod, no longer condescending. Just neutral. Progress, Clara thought. Small, but real. Victoria Parker was more pragmatic. At the next board meeting, she introduced Clara with measured confidence. Miss Mitchell has proven herself a valuable asset, she said. Her program is gaining attention. What she didn't say, but everyone felt, was that Clara had changed them. 2. She'd reminded them of what music was meant to be, not elitist. Not exclusive, but human. Emotional. alive. One afternoon, Richard Taylor approached Clara with a letter in hand. "It's from the Jefferson Foundation," he said. "They want to expand the program. More cities, more instructors, and they want you to lead the training." Clara blinked, stunned. "Me? You understand what they're trying to build," he said simply. "You lived it." That night, Clara stayed late in the practice room. The building was quiet again. The kind of quiet that used to make her feel invisible, but tonight, it felt peaceful. She sat at the piano, opened her grandmother's notebook, and began to play, not to prove anything, not even to prepare, just to remember. A soft knock sounded at the door. It was Jason, holding a folder. "I thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing it over. Inside were letters, from parents, students, and even a few staff members, thanking Clara for what she'd done, for what she was doing. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked up at Jason. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep going," he said, "because there are more kids waiting for someone to show them they matter." Clara nodded. "I will." As she locked the piano and turned out the lights, her reflection in the polished lid caught her eye. Not the faded uniform, not the downcast eyes, but a woman standing tall, still soft-spoken, still humble, but no longer hidden. "If you're still here with me, if Clara's quiet strength has stayed with you." Speech balloon comment. 2. Below to let me know you're still listening. Your voice matters, just like Claris did, and trust me, what happens next is where everything changes. Part 5. The Legacy We Leave Behind. It was a crisp spring morning when Clara Mitchell unlocked the main doors of the Aldridge Conservatory. The sunlight poured through the stained glass panels, scattering color across the polished marble floors she used to mop in silence. Now, she walked those same halls as the director of music within reach. A program that had grown from a small classroom initiative to a movement supported by the Jefferson Foundation. 4 local high schools, and 3 veteran musicians who had once doubted her, now volunteering at her side. But Clara didn't walk taller because of a title. She walked taller because she had finally remembered who she was. The news had spread. Videos of her gala performance had quietly gone viral. Shared not for spectacle, but for heart. No flashy editing, no dramatic music, just her hands, the keys, and the stunned silence that followed. The clip was even shown at a national educators' conference. One headline read, "From janitor to maestro, the lesson Clara Mitchell gave us all." But Clara never commented, never gave interviews. She told her students, "Music speaks for us. We don't need to shout." And they believed her. At 10 a.m., the new class arrived. A mix of teens from underserved schools, foster homes, and immigrant families. Some had never seen a grand piano before. One boy, Raphael, touched the keys like they might break. Clara knelt beside him. "They're just keys, Raphael, but they unlock something powerful when you trust them." He smiled. Just a little, just enough. Later that afternoon, as students practiced in separate rooms, Clara stepped outside for some air. The cherry blossoms were blooming along the walkway. She pulled her coat a little tighter and sat on the bench where she used to eat lunch alone. Victoria Parker joined her unexpectedly. "I wanted to tell you," Victoria began, her tone careful. "The board is considering renaming the recital hall." Clara blinked. "Why?" "Because," Victoria said slowly, "we think your story should be part of the foundation of this place. Not just a footnote." Clara was quiet. "You don't have to decide now," Victoria added quickly, "but think about it." Later that week, the final class of the term gathered for their recital. No tuxedos, no ticketed audience, just students, families, folding chairs, and a grand piano with a hand-lettered sign above it that read, "This stage belongs to everyone." One by one, the students played, imperfectly, nervously, brilliantly. When Raphael finished his rendition of Chopin's Prelude in E minor, Clara saw something in his mother's eyes. Not just pride, but awe, as if she'd just been reminded that her son's life could hold beauty, despite everything. After the applause, Clara was asked to say a few words. She stood at the piano, placed one hand on its edge, and looked at the students. "I used to think," she began, "that my story had ended before it even began. That once I gave up my dreams, they were gone forever." She paused. "But dreams don't die. They wait For courage, for the right moment, for someone to believe again. She scanned the room. You are that moment, for yourselves. For someone else watching, maybe even for someone who hasn't been heard yet. Silence fell, not because people didn't know how to respond, but because something in her words struck deep. Afterward, as families gathered their things and the lights dimmed, Jason approached with a small box. "What's this?" Clara asked. "A gift," he said, "from your students." Inside was a framed photo. A snapshot of Clara, seated at the piano, surrounded by her class. Behind them, someone had written in marker, "For Miss Mitchell, who showed us that quiet voices still carry music." She didn't cry, not right away, but that night, at home, she placed it beside her grandmother's old piano, the one that started it all. And she whispered, "We did it, Grandma. We finally played our song." Closing reflection. More than just a performance. Clara Mitchell didn't step onto that stage to prove anything to anyone. She stepped up because, deep down, she still believed in the value of what she once loved, and in the quiet dignity of showing up. Even when the world no longer sees you. Her story is not just about a piano performance. It's about resilience. It's about how our talents don't vanish with age or circumstance, they wait quietly, ready to shine when we find the courage to let them breathe again. Too often, society tells us that once we're past a certain point, our role is to step aside. But Clara's story reminds us that life's most meaningful contributions can come later, in moments shaped by wisdom, patience, and quiet strength. Whether you're 28 or 78, your voice still matters, your experience still matters, and your story? It could be the one that inspires someone else to keep going. So if this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been underestimated? Or did you ever find yourself rediscovering a passion thought long gone? Pushpin, leave a comment below and share your experience. Your words might lift someone else. Speech balloon type. Still standing, if Clara's journey reminded you of your own strength. And if you believe that powerful stories like Clara's deserve to be heard. Right finger, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you won't miss what comes next. Because here, we believe it's never too late to be seen. Never too late to start again. And never too late to let your quiet brilliance speak for itself.